Sarah Mitchell had been working as a civilian nurse at the Blackwater military base for 3 years, but she might as well have been invisible. The soldiers walked past her in the corridors without acknowledgement, their conversations stopping abruptly when she approached. To them, she was just another outsider who happened to wear scrubs instead of fatigues. The base operated like a closed ecosystem, where trust was earned through shared combat experience and brotherhood forged in blood. Sarah understood this, even if it stung. She had applied for the position hoping to serve those who served their country. But the reality was far more isolating than she had imagined. Every morning, Sarah arrived at the medical facility before dawn, checking supplies and preparing for the day ahead. The base was home to several elite units, including the legendary Viper Squadron, known for their precision operations in hostile territories. These soldiers were the cream of the crop, hand-picked for their skills and unwavering loyalty. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb ran the base with an iron fist and commanded respect from everyone under his watch. He had served 3 tours overseas and carried himself with the authority of someone who had seen real combat. His second-in-command, Major Thompson, was equally impressive, with a reputation for tactical brilliance that had saved countless lives in the field. Sarah often treated minor injuries and conducted routine medical checks, but the soldiers barely spoke to her beyond what was necessary. She was efficient and professional, but in their eyes, she lacked the credentials that mattered most. She had never worn the uniform or faced enemy fire. The base buzzed with constant activity as units prepared for various missions. Sarah noticed patterns in the medical requests, the timing of treatments, and the subtle changes in behavior among different groups. Her nursing training had taught her to be observant, to notice details that others might miss. During her lunch breaks, Sarah would sit alone in the cafeteria, watching the intricate social dynamics play out before her. The Viper Squadron members sat together, their conversation peppered with military jargon and inside jokes that civilians could never understand. Other units formed their own circles, but there was always a clear hierarchy and protocol. What Sarah didn't realize was that her position as an outsider would soon become her greatest asset. Her civilian status, which made her invisible to most, also made her privy to conversations and behaviors that military personnel would never discuss in front of their peers. The first sign that something was wrong came during a routine medical examination. Sergeant Kelly Davidson from Viper Squadron mentioned feeling unusually stressed about an upcoming mission. Nothing specific, just a general unease that didn't match his usual confident demeanor. Sarah made a note in his file, thinking it was just pre-mission nerves. Then came the supply discrepancies. Medical supplies were going missing at an alarming rate, but not the obvious items like painkillers or antibiotics. Instead, specialized equipment was disappearing, the kind used for treating specific battlefield injuries. Sarah reported the shortages to her supervisor, but was told that supply chain issues were common and not to worry about it. But Sarah's nursing instincts told her otherwise. She began keeping her own inventory, tracking every item that came and went. The pattern that emerged was troubling. Supplies were disappearing just before major operations, and always from areas accessible to only a select few personnel. Her observations were dismissed when she tried to bring them to the attention of the medical officer. As a civilian, her concerns carried little weight, and she was told to focus on her nursing duties rather than base security matters. The message was clear: stay in your lane and don't ask questions. The isolation Sarah felt began to transform into something else entirely. If no one was willing to listen to her concerns, she would have to investigate on her own. Her civilian status, which had been a barrier, now became a shield that allowed her to move through the base without drawing attention. Sarah started paying closer attention to the conversations around her, the timing of personnel movements, and the correlation between supply shortages and mission schedules. What she discovered would shake the very foundation of the base's security and expose a network of betrayal that reached into the highest levels of command. 3 weeks into her unofficial investigation, Sarah began noticing unusual communication patterns among certain personnel. During her evening shifts at the medical facility, she observed Major Thompson making frequent phone calls from his office, always after regular hours when fewer people were around. The calls were brief but occurred with suspicious regularity, especially before scheduled Viper Squadron operations. Sarah's medical rounds took her throughout the base, and her civilian credentials allowed her access to areas that might raise questions if visited by military personnel from other units. She began documenting her observations in a personal notebook, disguised as patient notes in case anyone questioned her writing. The breakthrough came when she was treating Staff Sergeant Rodriguez for a minor hand injury. During the examination, his phone buzzed with a text message that he quickly tried to hide, but Sarah had caught a glimpse of the sender's name, a contact listed simply as Phoenix. The message contained what appeared to be coordinates and a timestamp for the following. Rodriguez seemed nervous throughout the treatment, constantly checking his phone and glancing toward the door. When Sarah asked about his injury, he claimed it happened during routine training, but the wound pattern suggested something else entirely. The cuts were too precise, too clean to be from standard military exercises. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stayed late at the medical facility, using her computer access to cross-reference personnel files with the unusual activities she had observed. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Several key personnel, including Major Thompson and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, had financial irregularities in their background checks that had somehow been overlooked or deliberately ignored, bank deposits that didn't match their military salaries, family members living lifestyles that exceeded what their income should support, and travel records that placed them in questionable locations during their leave time. Sarah realized she was dealing with something far more serious than supply theft. The evidence pointed to a coordinated effort to compromise base security, potentially putting every soldier's life at risk. But who could she trust with this information? The chain of command included people she now suspected were involved in the conspiracy. The next morning brought devastating news. Viper Squadron's Alpha team had been ambushed during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. 3 soldiers were critically wounded, and the mission intelligence had clearly been compromised. The enemy had known exactly where to wait, what route the team would take, and how to neutralize their communication systems. Sarah watched as the wounded soldiers were brought to the medical facility. These were the same men who had dismissed her as just another civilian, but now their lives depended on her professional skills. As she worked to stabilize their injuries, she heard fragments of their debriefing with Lieutenant Colonel Webb. The ambush had been too precise, too well coordinated to be coincidental. Someone had provided the enemy with detailed operational intelligence, including troop movements, communication frequencies, and extraction points. The Viper Squadron commander, Captain Jake Morrison, was furious and demanding a full investigation into the security breach. During the medical treatment, Sarah overheard Captain Morrison mention that the mission parameters had been modified at the last minute by Major Thompson, changes that had put the team directly into the ambush zone. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but Sarah knew that accusations without concrete proof would be dismissed, especially coming from a civilian nurse. As she continued treating the wounded soldiers, Sarah made mental notes of everything she heard. The soldiers spoke freely in front of her, still not considering that a civilian might be gathering intelligence of her own. Their conversations revealed tactical details, security protocols, and most importantly, how information flowed through the command structure. Captain Morrison was particularly vocal about his suspicions, but his focus was on external threats rather than internal ones. He couldn't conceive that the betrayal might be coming from within their own ranks, from people they trusted, with their lives every day. Sarah realized that she was probably the only person on the base who had both the access to observe suspicious behavior and the outsider perspective to see patterns that military personnel might miss. Her civilian status, which had made her invisible, was now her greatest strength in uncovering the truth. But time was running out. If there was indeed a network of traitors operating within the base, they would undoubtedly plan more operations that would put additional lives at risk. Sarah knew she had to act, but she needed more evidence, and she needed to find someone she could trust with her discoveries. The question was whether anyone would believe a civilian nurse who claimed to have uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of base command. The very people she suspected were the ones with the authority to either investigate her claims or silence her permanently. Sarah's investigation took a dangerous turn when she decided to follow Staff Sergeant Rodriguez during his off-duty hours. Using her civilian vehicle and staying at a safe distance, She watched as he drove to a remote diner 15 miles from the base. The location was perfect for clandestine meetings, isolated with multiple exit routes, and far enough from the base to avoid military surveillance. At the diner, Rodriguez met with two individuals who were clearly not military personnel. Sarah parked across the street and used her phone to photograph the meeting, though the distance made it difficult to capture clear images of the faces. The meeting lasted exactly 20 minutes, and she observed Rodriguez receiving what appeared to be a small package before all three individuals left in separate directions. The next day, Sarah made a calculated risk. She approached Corporal Jenny Walsh, a young soldier from the Viper Squadron, who had always been polite during her medical visits. Unlike the older, more hardened soldiers, Walsh seemed more approachable and less likely to dismiss civilian concerns outright. During a routine medical check, Sarah carefully probed Walsh about base security protocols and recent changes in operational procedures. Walsh mentioned that several missions had been plagued by unexplained intelligence leaks, and that Captain Morrison was becoming increasingly paranoid about communication security. More importantly, Walsh revealed that Major Thompson had been pushing for changes in the Viper Squadron's operational structure, advocating for new protocols that would centralize mission planning through his office. This would give him unprecedented access to sensitive operational details across all teams. Sarah's nursing duties provided her with legitimate reasons to access various parts of the base, and she began using these opportunities to gather more evidence. During a supply run to the communications center, she noticed Major Thompson having an intense conversation with someone on his personal phone. The call was in a language she didn't recognize, but his body language suggested urgency and concern. The medical facility's computer system gave Sarah access to personnel schedules and movement logs. Cross-referencing this data with the timing of the intelligence leaks, she discovered a disturbing pattern. Every compromised mission had been preceded by specific personnel being granted unusual access to classified information, always authorized by Major Thompson. Sarah's investigation received an unexpected boost when she was asked to conduct medical evaluations for a new batch of recruits. Among the files was background information that revealed connections between several base personnel and foreign financial institutions. The connections were subtle and probably legal, but they painted a picture of individuals with divided loyalties and potential financial motivations for betrayal. The pressure was mounting as Sarah realized the scope of the conspiracy. It wasn't just Major Thompson and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. The evidence suggested a network of at least 5 individuals working together to systematically compromise base security. They were selling operational intelligence to foreign contacts, putting American soldiers' lives at risk for financial gain. But Sarah's amateur surveillance hadn't gone unnoticed. Major Thompson began showing up unexpectedly at the medical facility, claiming to be conducting routine inspections. His visits always seemed to coincide with times when Sarah was alone, and his questions about her work and observations became increasingly probing. During one particularly uncomfortable encounter, Thompson asked Sarah directly about her interactions with Viper Squadron personnel and whether she had noticed any unusual behavior among the soldiers. His tone was casual, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Sarah realized that her investigation had made her a target. The situation escalated when Sarah discovered that her computer access logs were being monitored. Someone was tracking which files she accessed and when, which meant her research into personnel records and mission schedules had been detected. She was walking a tightrope between gathering enough evidence to expose the conspiracy and avoiding detection by the very people she was investigating. Sarah knew she needed help, but the chain of command was compromised. She couldn't approach Lieutenant Colonel Webb without knowing if he was involved or if he would simply alert the conspirators to her investigation. The base's security personnel might be compromised as well, leaving her with few options for reporting her findings. The breaking point came when Sarah overheard a conversation between Major Thompson and an unknown individual in a supply closet near the medical facility. They were discussing the nurse problem and debating whether she posed a significant threat to their operation. The implication was clear. Sarah's life was in danger. That night, Sarah made copies of all her evidence and hid them in multiple locations both on and off the base. If something happened to her, at least there would be a record of what she had discovered. But she also realized that she needed to accelerate her timeline. The conspirators were becoming aware of her investigation, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a civilian nurse who threatened their lucrative operation. Sarah's next move would determine whether she could expose the traitors. Before they silenced her permanently, she needed to find someone in the Viper Squadron who could be trusted, someone with the authority and integrity to act on her evidence. The question was whether such a person existed, and whether they would believe the word of a civilian nurse against decorated military officers. Captain Jake Morrison had earned his reputation through 15 years of exemplary service and an unblemished record of successful operations. Known throughout the military community by his call sign Viper 1, he commanded respect not through intimidation, but through competence and genuine care for his soldiers. When Sarah finally decided to approach him, she knew she was taking the biggest gamble of her life. The opportunity came during a late-night emergency when a training accident brought several soldiers to the medical facility. Captain Morrison accompanied his injured team members, and Sarah seized the moment when they were alone in the recovery room. With her voice barely above a whisper, she told him she had critical information about base security that affected the safety of his squadron. Morrison's initial reaction was skeptical. A civilian nurse claiming to have uncovered a conspiracy involving senior officers seemed far-fetched, even paranoid. But something in Sarah's demeanor, her detailed knowledge of recent operations and her obvious fear convinced him to listen. She quickly outlined her observations, the pattern of intelligence leaks and the suspicious behavior she had documented over the past month. What convinced Morrison completely was when Sarah revealed specific details about the Alpha Team ambush that hadn't been included in any official reports. She knew about the last-minute route changes, the modified communication protocols, and the precise timing of the enemy's position, information that only someone with access to classified operational details could possess. Morrison's expression hardened as the implications became clear. Someone within his own command structure was systematically betraying his soldiers, selling their lives for money. The warrior in him wanted immediate action, but his experience taught him the importance of strategy and careful planning. Together, they developed a plan to gather additional evidence while protecting Sarah from the growing suspicion of the conspirators. Morrison would use his authority to access communication logs and financial records that Sarah couldn't reach as a civilian. Meanwhile, Sarah would continue her observations, but with Morrison's protection and guidance. The investigation revealed the full scope of the betrayal. Major Thompson was indeed the ringleader, but the conspiracy included Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Communications Specialist Davis, and Supply Officer Martinez. They had been operating for over 2 years, selling intelligence to foreign agents and covering their tracks through falsified reports and modified security protocols. Morrison discovered that the group had been using encrypted communication apps on personal devices to coordinate their activities. They had established a sophisticated system for gathering and selling operational intelligence, with Major Thompson using his position to access mission details across multiple units, not just the Viper Squadron. The financial trail was equally damaging. Each conspirator had offshore accounts containing hundreds of thousands of dollars, far exceeding what their military salaries could justify. They had been careful to avoid sudden lifestyle changes that might attract attention, instead building long-term financial security through systematic betrayal. But uncovering the conspiracy was only half the battle. Morrison realized that a direct confrontation or premature arrests might allow some conspirators to escape or destroy evidence. They needed to catch the entire network in the act, with undeniable proof of their treachery. The plan Morrison and Sarah developed was audacious and dangerous. They would feed false information to suspected conspirators and track how that information moved through enemy channels. By creating fake operational details and monitoring when and how those details were leaked, they could trace the exact path of the betrayal. Sarah's role was crucial because her civilian status allowed her to observe and report without raising suspicion. She would continue her normal duties while secretly gathering evidence of the conspirators' activities. Morrison, meanwhile, would set up surveillance and prepare for the moment when they had enough evidence to act. The psychological pressure on both Sarah and Morrison was enormous. They were surrounded by people they couldn't trust, including individuals with the authority to end their careers or worse. Every conversation became a potential trap, every routine interaction a chance for their investigation to be discovered. Morrison was particularly troubled by the betrayal of Major Thompson, an officer he had respected and worked with for 3 years. The realization that someone he had trusted with the lives of his soldiers was actively selling them out to the enemy was almost unbearable. It forced him to question his judgment and wonder how many other trusted colleagues might be compromised. For Sarah, the investigation had transformed her from an invisible civilian into a key player in a life-or-death situation. Her medical training helped her remain calm under pressure, but she was acutely aware that she was operating far outside her area of expertise. One mistake could expose the investigation and put both her and Morrison in mortal danger. The conspiracy was about to be tested in the most dangerous way possible. Morrison learned that the Viper Squadron was being assigned a high-priority mission that would take place within the week. If the conspirators were going to strike again, this would be their opportunity. Sarah and Morrison had to be ready to catch them in the act, while protecting the lives of the soldiers who would be walking into what might be another carefully orchestrated ambush. The upcoming mission was designated Operation Blackbird, a high-stakes reconnaissance operation deep in hostile territory. Morrison knew this would be the perfect opportunity for the conspirators to strike again, and he and Sarah prepared their trap with meticulous care. They created multiple versions of the mission plan, each with slightly different details, and distributed them only to specific individuals they suspected of involvement. Sarah's position in the medical facility became the perfect observation post. As soldiers prepared for the mission, she monitored who had access to medical supplies, communication equipment, and most importantly, who made unusual requests or showed signs of nervous behavior. Her years of nursing experience had taught her to read people's emotional states, and she noticed several telltale signs among the suspected conspirators. Major Thompson requested detailed medical supplies for the mission, including specific battlefield trauma equipment that wasn't typically needed for reconnaissance operations. When Sarah questioned the requisition, Thompson became defensive and insisted that thorough preparation was essential for soldier safety. But the items he requested suggested he knew the mission would involve combat that wasn't mentioned in the official briefing. Meanwhile, Morrison conducted his own surveillance of the communication center. Using his command authority, he had installed monitoring equipment that would track all outgoing transmissions without alerting the base's regular security systems. If intelligence was being leaked, Morrison would know exactly when, how, and by whom. The psychological tension was reaching a breaking point for everyone involved. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was showing visible signs of stress, making mistakes in routine duties and becoming increasingly isolated from his fellow soldiers. Communications Specialist Davis was working unusual hours, claiming to be updating security protocols but actually transmitting encrypted messages to unknown recipients. Sarah discovered the smoking gun when she observed Rodriguez meeting with the same unknown contacts from the diner. But this time the meeting took place in a parking lot just outside the base's main gate. Using her phone, she managed to capture clear images of Rodriguez receiving a briefcase and handing over what appeared to be documents. The transaction was quick and professional, clearly part of an established routine. Morrison's surveillance equipment detected the transmission of mission details just hours after the final briefing. The encrypted communication came from Davis's workstation and included specific details about troop movements, communication frequencies, and extraction points. Most damning of all, the transmission included intelligence that had been part of the false information Morrison had planted specifically to identify the leak. The evidence was overwhelming, but Morrison faced a terrible dilemma. The mission was scheduled to launch in less than 12 hours, and canceling it would alert the conspirators that their activities had been discovered. But allowing it to proceed would put his soldiers in mortal danger. Morrison made the hardest decision of his career. The mission would go forward, but with modifications that the conspirators wouldn't expect. Working through the night, Morrison secretly altered the mission parameters. The actual route, timing, and objectives were changed while maintaining the appearance that the original plan was still in effect. Only a handful of completely trusted soldiers knew about the modifications, creating a false target for the conspirators while protecting the real mission. Sarah played a crucial role in the deception by ensuring that medical preparations matched the false intelligence being fed to the enemy. She prepared supplies and equipment for the fake mission, while secretly coordinating with Morrison to support the actual operation. Her civilian status continued to provide perfect cover for these activities. The night before the mission launch, Sarah witnessed the final piece of the conspiracy. Major Thompson made a clandestine phone call from his office, speaking in what she now recognized as coded language about package delivery and schedule confirmation. He was providing final mission details to enemy contacts, completely unaware that he was sealing his own fate. Morrison's modified mission plan worked perfectly. The Viper Squadron executed the real operation without incident, while enemy forces waited in ambush positions based on the false intelligence. When the expected targets failed to appear, the enemy's frustration and confusion were intercepted by military intelligence, providing additional evidence of the leak. But the success of the mission was only the beginning. Morrison and Sarah now had ironclad evidence of the conspiracy, including recorded communications, financial records, and photographic proof of treasonous activities. The challenge was how to arrest the conspirators without giving any of them the opportunity to escape or destroy additional evidence. Morrison coordinated with military, police, and federal investigators who had been briefed on the situation. The arrests would be simultaneous and swift, catching all 4 conspirators before they could warn each other or flee. Sarah's evidence would be crucial in ensuring that the legal case against them was airtight. The moment of reckoning was at hand. Everything Sarah had observed and documented, every risk Morrison had taken, and every sleepless night they had endured was about to pay off. The traitors who had betrayed their country and endangered American soldiers were about to face justice, thanks to the investigation launched by a civilian nurse whom everyone had dismissed as an outsider. But even as they prepared for the arrests, both Sarah and Morrison knew that the psychological scars from this betrayal would last long after the conspirators were in prison. The knowledge that respected officers had been willing to sell soldiers' lives for money would forever change how they viewed trust and loyalty within the military community. The arrests began at precisely 0600 hours, coordinated across multiple locations to ensure none of the conspirators could warn the others. Morrison led the team that apprehended Major Thompson in his quarters, while military police simultaneously arrested Rodriguez, Davis, and Martinez at their respective locations. Each arrest was conducted with clinical precision, leaving no opportunity for evidence destruction or escape attempts. Sarah watched from the medical facility as Major Thompson was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. The man who had commanded respect throughout the base, who had been responsible for the safety and security of hundreds of soldiers, was now revealed as a traitor who had sold out his own country for money. The evidence against the conspirators was overwhelming. Morrison's surveillance had captured Thompson's final communication with enemy contacts, while Sarah's photographs provided visual proof of Rodriguez's meetings with foreign agents. Financial records showed a clear pattern of payments coinciding with intelligence leaks, and encrypted communications revealed the full scope of their treacherous activities. During the interrogations that followed, the full details of the conspiracy emerged. Thompson had been recruited 3 years earlier during a financial crisis caused by his ex-wife's medical bills. What started as a one-time transaction for relatively harmless information had gradually escalated into systematic betrayal that put countless lives at risk. Rodriguez had been brought into the conspiracy through gambling, debts that threatened to destroy his military career. Communications specialist Davis had been motivated by ideology rather than money, believing that American military operations in certain regions were unjust. Supply officer Martinez had simply been greedy, seeing an opportunity to secure his family's financial future regardless of the consequences. The scope of their betrayal was staggering. Over 2 years, they had provided enemy forces with intelligence that led to the deaths of at least 12 American soldiers and the compromise of dozens of sensitive operations. The failed Alpha Team mission was just the most recent in a series of betrayals that had cost lives and damaged national security. Sarah found herself thrust into the center of a media storm as news of the conspiracy broke. Military investigators, federal prosecutors, and intelligence officials all wanted to interview the civilian nurse who had uncovered one of the most damaging spy rings in recent military history. Her civilian status, which had made her invisible to the conspirators, now made her a symbol of vigilance and patriotism. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. With the evidence Sarah and Morrison had gathered, there was no possibility of the conspirators avoiding conviction. Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without parole for treason, while his accomplices received sentences ranging from 30 to 50 years. The message was clear. Betraying American soldiers would result in the harshest possible punishment. But the impact on the base community went far beyond the legal consequences. The revelation that trusted officers had been systematically betraying their colleagues shattered the foundation of trust that military units depend on for survival. Soldiers who had served alongside the conspirators for years struggled to reconcile their memories of competent, respected colleagues with the reality of their treachery. Morrison was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of base security, a recognition of both his leadership during the crisis and the trust military leadership now placed in him. His reputation as Viper One was enhanced, not just by his combat skills, but by his integrity and dedication to protecting his soldiers from threats both external and internal. Sarah faced her own set of challenges as the dust settled. Some military personnel struggled to accept that a civilian had uncovered what their own security apparatus had missed. There were whispers that she had overstepped her bounds, that she should have reported her suspicions through official channels rather than conducting her own investigation. But the majority of soldiers on the base viewed Sarah as a hero who had saved countless lives through her vigilance and courage. Captain Morrison publicly credited her with preventing additional ambushes that would have resulted in numerous casualties. Her willingness to risk her own safety to protect soldiers who had initially dismissed her as an outsider earned their respect and gratitude. The base implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from the conspiracy. Background checks were enhanced, financial monitoring was increased, and oversight of communication systems was strengthened. But perhaps most importantly, the base leadership recognized that security threats could come from anywhere, and that concerns raised by any personnel, regardless of their status, deserved serious investigation. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy transformed her from an invisible civilian into an integral part of the base community. Soldiers who had previously ignored her now sought her out for conversation, medical advice, and sometimes just the reassurance that someone was watching out for their welfare. Her civilian perspective, once seen as a limitation, was now valued as an asset that provided unique insights into base operations. The conspiracy's exposure also led to broader changes in military security protocols across all branches of service. Sarah's investigative methods were studied and incorporated into training programs for security personnel, demonstrating how careful observation and pattern recognition could identify threats that high-tech surveillance might miss. 2 years after the conspiracy was exposed, Blackwater Military Base had been transformed into a model of security and transparency. Sarah Mitchell, now serving as the base's chief medical officer, had earned recognition not just for her role in exposing the traitors, but for her ongoing contributions to military healthcare and security awareness. The changes went beyond personnel and procedures. The entire culture of the base had evolved to embrace the principle that security was everyone's responsibility, regardless of rank or civilian status. Sarah's story became part of the orientation for all new personnel, a reminder that vigilance and integrity could come from unexpected sources. Morrison, now Colonel Morrison and base commander, frequently cited the conspiracy case in his leadership training sessions. He emphasized how the dismissive attitude towards civilian personnel had nearly cost lives and how the military's strength came not just from its warriors, but from everyone who supported the mission. The soldiers who had initially ignored Sarah now treated her as family. She knew their children's names, attended their promotions and retirement ceremonies, and had become a trusted confidant for personal as well as professional matters. The invisible nurse had become the heart of the base community. Sarah's medical facility had been expanded and modernized, partly in recognition of her service, but also because her enhanced security awareness had identified numerous other areas for improvement. She had developed protocols for recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior that were now used throughout the military healthcare system. The impact of the conspiracy's exposure extended far beyond Blackwater. Congressional hearings led to significant changes in military security protocols, background investigation procedures, and financial monitoring systems. Sarah was invited to testify before Congress, where she emphasized that security threats could come from anyone, and that diverse perspectives were essential for identifying vulnerabilities. The 4 conspirators remained in federal prison, their betrayal serving as a cautionary tale throughout the military community. Thompson had attempted to appeal his conviction, claiming that financial pressure had forced him into an impossible situation, but the courts had no sympathy for someone who had sold American lives for personal gain. Rodriguez had died in prison 2 years into his sentence, reportedly unable to cope with the guilt of his actions and the hatred of his fellow inmates. Davis had become a model prisoner, claiming to have found religion and expressing remorse for his ideological extremism. Martinez continued to maintain his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, becoming a bitter and isolated figure. Sarah often reflected on how different things might have been if she had been taken seriously from the beginning. How many lives could have been saved if her initial observations about supply discrepancies and behavioral changes had been properly investigated? But she also understood that sometimes being an outsider was necessary. To see what insiders missed, the base now conducted regular security awareness training, where Sarah shared her story and taught personnel how to identify potential indicators of compromise. Her civilian perspective was valued precisely because it was different from traditional military thinking. She emphasized that security was not about suspicion and paranoia, but about caring enough to pay attention and act when something seemed wrong. Morrison and Sarah had developed a friendship that transcended their professional relationship. They regularly discussed security matters, base operations, and the ongoing challenge of maintaining vigilance without destroying trust. Morrison often said that Sarah had taught him that leadership meant listening to everyone, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. The media attention surrounding the case had eventually faded, but Sarah continued to receive recognition for her service. She had been awarded the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, the highest honor that could be given to a civilian. More importantly to her, she had the respect and gratitude of the soldiers whose lives she had saved. Sarah's story had inspired other military facilities to reevaluate their relationship with civilian personnel and to recognize the valuable perspectives they could provide. Security protocols were enhanced across the military to include input from all personnel, not just those in traditional security roles. The transformation of Blackwater Base from a place where Sarah felt invisible to a community where she was valued and respected served as a powerful reminder that true security came not from exclusion but from inclusion. The nurse who had been dismissed as an outsider had become the person who brought everyone together in a common commitment to protecting those who served their country. As Sarah continued her work at the base, she remained vigilant but no longer alone. The community that had once ignored her now watched out for her, just as she watched out for them. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy the base from within had ultimately made it stronger by teaching everyone the value of trust, vigilance, and the courage to speak up when something was wrong.